Hello, everybody, to our January Child Talk. And it is a pleasure to introduce to you our two speakers today, Dr. Katrina McChesney and Dr. James Burford. There's a third collaborator for the project they're going to introduce today and tell us about, who is Professor Lisa Frick, who's not here today, but today we're going to talk about quality provision and support for distance doctoral students. And at the University of Glasgow and at other universities as well and other institutions, we have more and more people joining from abroad and online our programs. And that also includes doctoral students. So I can't wait to hear about your project, and it's very ambitious from what I read from the abstract. So I can't wait to hear about it. So I'm going to hand over to you. Now, let me just share my screen here. Here we go.
Great, thank you very much. I'll share mine. All right. And can everyone see the slides okay?
Yes, that works.
Fantastic. All right, well, kia ora koutou. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here, and thank you so much, Carolina, for the really warm introduction and for, that fantastic welcome music. Very nice for a Tuesday morning for me and a Tuesday evening for Katrina, who's going to introduce herself in just a moment. So, as you said, the title of our talk today is Quality Provision and Support for Distance Doctoral Students. And Katrina and I are going to be presenting on behalf of our colleague, Lisa Frick, who's from Stellenbosch University and who unfortunately couldn't join us today. If you're interested at all in the world of Twitter, please do follow and engage with our hashtag on Twitter, which is #DistanceDoctorates, where we try to keep a sort of running series of updates about the kind of engagement work we do with this project. So please do take a look. Okay, so we'll introduce ourselves in just a moment, but I wanted to give you a look at what's ahead for our talk today. We're going to start by locating ourselves and talking about where we're speaking from and the experiences that brought both Katrina and I to this particular project. We'll spend a little bit of time thinking about what distance doctoral education might be, where it's travelled over time, and what it means to think about distance doctoral education in the context of, in the wake of the pandemic. Then we'll spend a bit of time introducing our wider distance doctorates project and talk a little bit about that. And then we'll present some early findings from our research, which will allow us to have a bit of an insight into today's distance doctoral students, those who engaged with our project. We'll talk about how distance modes connect to equity, diversity and inclusion considerations within higher education, and introduce some early impressions from across the quantitative and qualitative elements of our data. So we'll finish up with some ways to connect with us and stay in touch with our project. So that's sort of where we're hoping to cover today. That's quite a lot of things to try and do. So we'll do our absolute best, but we do want to leave a bit of time at the end for, for us to have a conversation and a dialogue with each other. So Katrina, I wonder if you wanted to go first in terms of sharing a bit about where you're coming from in terms of this project.
So, kia ora everybody, I'm Katrina and I'm joining you from very late night here in New Zealand. This really started because I was a distance doctoral student before it was kind of cool, you know, before COVID made everybody a distance doctoral student for a period. And a lot happened in my distance doctorate, as you can see from the list there, lots of life. I started when I was working in the Middle East and then moved home here to New Zealand about 3-4 years in, and I made it through my doctorate. And the photo there is not, you know, glad rags, but just the first time I set foot on my university campus was that day when I picked up my robes and graduated. So I was as distant as you can get. And the more I reflected, the more I felt that the provision could have been better. There were a lot of us studying with that particular university from overseas, and it always stayed with me as a niggle that, you know, there's some issues here around equity and diversity and inclusion. And so that was really the genesis for the project, and connected with Jamie, who I knew had also done his by distance. So back to you.
Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, my similar sort of story for me a little bit. So I did my PhD. I started my PhD while I was working in one part of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and studying in another island. And then over time, I moved abroad. I got a job in Thailand, and so continued my doctoral study from there, and would occasionally sort of commute back to Auckland to kind of touch base with my supervisors, but I did a lot of my my doctoral research online. And, you know, throughout my PhD journey, like, you know, Katrina is listed here, lots of different things happen in the space of a doctoral life. Doctoral lives are often full of other kind of life events, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the context of our survey data in just a moment. But yeah, for me, my doctorate involved studying in one place and living in another. It involved lots of variations of candidature, and at times it involved, you know, managing my doctoral study, full-time work, as well as care responsibilities for somebody else. So over the course of my doctorate, I had 7 house moves. I moved countries multiple times, moved cities multiple times. It was a very full time in my life, and I just wanted to sort of paint a picture of yeah, how complex and varied and multifaceted distance doctoral lives can be. And yeah, I was very grateful when Katrina reached out to me, and we embarked on this project together. So let's talk a little bit more about it. But first, I'm going to hand over to Katrina, who's going to give us a bit of an insight into what distance doctoral education might mean.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, we think today about distance in terms of digital and onlineness, but distance education is not a new thing. And right from the beginning, it's been kind of an enabler for people who couldn't otherwise reach the places where face-to-face forms of education happened. It started off in schooling sector, and we've got 25 odd years of distance doctoral education practice and a small amount of literature on it. But there's been so much change over that time that we haven't really refreshed our, you know, theorizations of what it means to be a distance student or to do a distance doctorate. There's a lot of fuzziness around that, which our survey kind of affirms. People usually think about distance as just, you know, being not there, but that might be by choice, by need, by preference, because you are far away, because you're right there and you just don't want to go in or can't go in. Can we have the next slide, Jamie? So it used to happen by post, which allowed for very little interaction. It was a very independent thing. And I think that there's some hangover from that. The early days of distance, you'd get all of your coursework in the post and you'd be on your own to figure it out, produce the learning artifacts, assignment, thesis, whatever, send it back to the university where it would be judged. Through the digital era, distance forms of pedagogy have become much more interactive and collaborative and kind of catching up with what we know about great classroom practice. And the COVID pandemic pushed that even further. So in undergraduate programs and taught postgraduate programs, we do see a lot more interactive digital practice. But doctoral education has perhaps been the last to catch up with some of those ways of working, and perhaps the least change from how it might have looked 20, 50, 100 years ago in terms of the conversations with a supervisor and what that might involve. A lot of people became distance doctoral students by force, as some of you might have, or you might have supervised students who did as a result of the pandemic. And we know that there's been lasting impacts, not just in education, but in society in terms of the norms of ways of working. Businesses, it's much more common now post-COVID to have these flexible working policies, to have staff working from home. And so that's affecting doctoral students just like anybody else. So it's really timely to rethink what is distance doctoral education in 2023 post-COVID, with all the technology we have and all the disruption we've been navigating. Next one, Jamie. So we don't just approach this as a kind of curiosity that needs to be studied. It's personal to us, obviously, because we both did our doctorates this way and we supervise students who are off campus, but both of us bring a wider commitment to social justice in higher education. And we think there's a really important equity argument here, because distance makes doctoral study possible. There's no way I would have done a doctorate if I couldn't have done it by distance while I still worked, while I had an income, while I had a new baby, all of those things. And I came from all sorts of forms of privilege. If I'd thought about it, I possibly could have done it on campus, but I never even considered that as an option. Distance was what made it possible for me and many others, we think, to engage in doctoral study. We know more broadly how important it is to have diverse representation in higher education cohorts, and that's relevant for doctoral cohorts too. And so distance study is a really important bridge to make sure that the most diverse possible group of students can access doctoral education. I know the Tile Network had a talk some time ago from Gail Crimmins around the differences between access and inclusion, and that resonates with our work though, because although you can enroll in a doctorate as a distance student or choose to not go into the university, you may or may not be getting what we'd call inclusive and equitable opportunities. And so that's where our project comes in. Given the real lack of research on distance doctoral research, we decided the best place to start was just to hear from students, to kind of get a snapshot of what has been going on and how people have been experiencing it. We didn't want to just assume that our stories were the model of everybody's stories. So before campaigning for big changes or recommending what was needed, we wanted to hear to inform our calls towards equity. Is that all for me there?
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks, Katrina. Alrighty, so let me introduce our project. I mean, we've got a sort of multiple prongs to this project. As Katrina said, it sort of started out with a question that, you know, Katrina asked me if I'd be interested in doing some work on this in this area. We knew that it would be great to have a superstar team of colleagues joining us. So we invited Professor Liesl Frick, who's based in South Africa and who has expertise in supervision, among other things, and Dr. Chin Koo, who's based in Melbourne in Australia, whose expertise is in research and development and kind of digital and online community building, that kind of thing. So we thought that together we would embark on this project of thinking about distance doctoral education together. So what we've done so far is created a website which has some resources for distance doctoral students. And you can see the link to the website there, which we try and keep up to date and lively and engaging for students who might want to engage with it. We've also created a Facebook community group to connect distance doctoral researchers in a wide range of disciplines, contexts and circumstances all around the world. So as you can see, our group has over 800 members now. It's a thriving community. You know, we are moderators in the group, but we sort of step back and let the community itself, you know, provide advice and suggestions and kind of belonging for each other. It's been amazing to see what this group has been able to do. You know, there have been meetings where group members have got together to write together, that kind of thing. So These are two kind of ways that we try and give back to the community that we are engaging with. At the same time, we've also undertaken a research study which focuses on the barriers, opportunities, strategies, and successes related to doctoral research by distance. And as I'll introduce in just a moment, we've launched and completed an online international anonymous survey, which aims to, as Katrina said, get a snapshot of who some of the the context that some of the students who identify with being distance doctoral students are working in, some of the challenges and barriers that they might encounter, but also some of the strategies that they develop to make the most of the opportunities they have in doctoral study and the successes that they've encountered. At the same time, we've also drafted, I guess we could say, Katrina, a book, which is sort of a companion project for the doctoral study, for the research study. And this book is aimed at a student audience, and its current title is Doctoral Research by Distance, Navigating Off-Campus, Online, Hybrid and Cross-National Doctoral Study. And I hope that that should be kind of wrapping up sometime this year. So that's a sort of snapshot of the project as a whole. But what I wanted to do today was to spend a bit more time talking about our survey results and what we're learning as we sort of delve into these. These are still sort of early thoughts for us. We're still, making our way through the analysis, but we wanted to, share some work in progress. So here's a little bit more about the study. We launched it in 2022, and as I said, the goal was to capture perspectives of those who had recently completed or were currently undertaking doctoral research by distance. For our study, that included those who might be officially enrolled by distance. So, there might be an option where students could identify that. But we also wanted to take a broad conceptualization of what distance might mean. As Katrina said, we're interested in sort of poking around about the sort of definition of distance and what it means, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. So we also sought to capture the experiences of a wider range of candidates who might be engaging in doctoral study off campus or online or in flexible or hybrid ways, or who might be away from the country where they were studying for any number of reasons. So we tried to take quite a broad conceptualization of what distance might mean. In terms of the participants, they had to be either enrolled in or recently completed a doctorate. And if they'd already completed, we set a graduation date of no earlier than 2015. All participants were over 18 years of age. And the survey was distributed over a number of months, over listservs, on social media, sent out via personal contacts, and within our own institutions, that kind of thing. And you can see here a tweet from Chin, which is sort of advertising the study, and that's sort of how we did that. Overall, we got 521 responses from folks in 42 different countries and from diverse fields of study. So I'll introduce a little bit more about the cohort who engaged with our survey now. Yes, and this is what we're going to talk about in terms of explaining the data. We want to talk a little bit about who the distance students were, their backgrounds in our project. We'll talk a little bit about their life circumstances during their enrollment and their motivations for studying via distance. We'll go over quickly their experiences of supervision and researcher development and how the pandemic affected their doctoral journey. And we'll sort of land with some early thoughts from the qualitative questions about the barriers that they experienced and the strategies that they've identified. So who were the respondents in our survey? There were a larger number of women respondents than men, as you can see here. Oops, let me go back. As well as students who were non-binary or preferred not to say. And from my experience of working in doctoral education, research and development for a long time, there is often a lot more engagement from women in these kinds of doctoral community gatherings, events, that kind of thing. And so I wonder whether that might have had an impact on the smaller number of men that we've recruited for our study. In terms of the age backgrounds, you can see that there's a sort of cluster around the sort of late 20s and early 30s. That's where the majority of our participants were placed. However, there is quite a wide stretch here. So we have people who are in their very early 20s who are undertaking doctoral research, as well as people into their 70s. So this should remind us all, I think, that doctoral education is made up of increasingly diverse cohorts across, multiple characteristics, and the students that we work with represent a wider cross-section of society, and that needs to, we need to think about that when we think about how we provide doctoral education and any accommodations or that kind of thing that we might need to put in place. So that is the age backgrounds of the students who took the survey. In terms of the country of residence, this might reflect the kind of a little bit the countries of residence of the research team. So Katrina and Chin are based in Australasia, and so have strong networks and connections in there. I'm based over here in the UK, and so it could be that some of the those networks that we activated in order to distribute the survey are reflected in the respondent backgrounds. But we were really happy to see that we also had a good showing from respondents from North America, from Africa, again reflecting Liesel's involvement perhaps in the project, and in Asia and the Middle East, where both Katrina and I have also spent some time working. So yeah, that's a sort of distribution of the country of residence of the participants. As you can see, quite a large number from Australia, from the UK, from Aotearoa New Zealand, and from the US, which perhaps also reflects that our survey was English-based, and so yeah, that shapes some of the participation and engagement. In terms of the respondent backgrounds, the location of the university granting the doctorate, most of the participants in our study were in the same country they primarily lived during their doctorate, at 84%, 10% in a different country that I didn't live in at all during my doctorate, and 6% in a country that I lived in for a shorter time during my doctorate. So lots of students who are doing distance doctoral study in the same country that they have lived in. And in terms of the disciplinary affiliation of our respondents, we had a large number of education respondents at 32%, the social sciences, excluding education, at around 21%, and 20% in the sciences, 18% in the arts and humanities, 4% in business and management, and then smaller percentages in engineering, design, and technology. And in terms of the current enrollment status of our respondents, 65% of them, their study was still ongoing. 26% of them had already graduated with their doctorates. 6% were in that submitted in the process of examination, awaiting defence kind of stage. 2% in a leave of absence, and 1% had dropped out or withdrawn from their programs. For our students, sorry, I'm just moving the screen. For our students, the doctorate, for sort of 251 of our students, this was their first time studying by distance, but there are quite a large number who had already had the experience of studying by distance before, at 208. So that's something to also bear in mind when thinking about these responses. All right, so I think I'm now going to hand over to Katrina, now that I've introduced who our cohort are, and Katrina is going to talk a little bit more about their life experiences during their doctorate.
Yeah, so, we can't claim that this is a perfectly representative sample. That's not the kind of research we were setting out to do. It was exploratory. We just wanted to get the word out and gather as many stories as we can. So the point in presenting some of those demographic statistics is not to say this is exactly what all doctoral cohorts look like, but to say we did hear from a wide range of people. And so one of the really interesting things that they told us, which echoed mine and Jamie's experiences, was just how much life went on for them during their doctoral enrolment. Huge numbers of them had parenting, family, care, responsibilities, changes to relationships, changes to employment, changes to income, moving, trauma, loss of people who were significant to them, and mental health was, interestingly, the most prevalent life experience. I guess if we were to group all of the family and care ones, that would probably overtake mental health. But you can see on the right there, the highest single bar was the number of doctoral students who flagged that mental health issues came up for them. We did have more precise descriptions of these in the survey. We tried to shorten them a little bit for the graph. Next one, Jamie. We counted up, here's some of the, yes please, next slide, thank you. These are some of the words that came in just in the other please specify. People could tick from our list of events what happened to them, but then we had other please specify, and some people reiterated things that had already been counted in the graph that we just showed you. But it's revealing just to have a really impressionistic look at what came up. One thing that surprised me was the number of people who talked about pets and how important that was. I'm not an animal lover at all, so I would never have predicted that. But we did hear from people, for some of them, the loss of an animal or getting a new animal was, similar to how a different person might feel about parenting or loss of a child or a family member. Some people, their reason for being a distance student was so that they didn't leave their pets at home alone. This was, a new thought to me. The next slide, Jamie, I've just chosen one account. This is from one respondent. This is her whole response. She was a grandmother. So one daughter was hospitalised for 7 weeks and had a major diagnosis during the grandmother's doctoral enrolment. Then a different daughter had some severe prenatal and postnatal issues, and due to COVID, the grandmother couldn't get there, so there's the anxiety around that. Then she also had her own elderly parents, so I guess great-grandparents, had some issues, including dad breaking his neck, and so living with them, caring, taking them to appointments. And then if that weren't enough, this poor woman, her house flooded and she lost everything, had to move in with her adult son, and hadn't had insurance because she'd, been a single parent, a beneficiary, and now a pensioner above retirement age. So that's one person's account. I think these sorts of experiences are more normal than extraordinary, and I don't say that to kind of diminish how challenging or significant they are for each individual. But I think it's evidence that it's time for us to stop assuming that most students have a straightforward life experience over the years of their doctorate. I think our data suggests that most students have, I think the average was like 3.8 significant life events during the course of their doctorate. And remember that 65% of our respondents were still enrolled. So by the time they actually finished, that number might have been even higher. So that's the first really important insight around who these students are and what might be going on for them in addition to their study. They're not unencumbered, working full-time on their doctorate with nothing else to occupy their time, finances, labour, emotions. Next one, Jamie. Oh, here we go. We counted it. 3.84. There we go. Good memory. One person, the maximum number of life events was actually 16. There, as you can see from the graph, we had a summer student put some of these slides together, so there's a little mistake there. You know, a good number of people just had a small number of these big life events, but you can see the tail goes up with a lot of people had a lot of big stuff going on in the 1 to 8 years perhaps of their doctoral enrollment so far. Next one, Jamie. We asked them about their reasons for undertaking a doctorate, and then we asked them about their reasons for doing it by distance. So this slide is just, why did you want to do a doctorate? And these are, we don't have a comparison data set, but we think these are probably fairly typical. If you were to ask some on-campus doctoral students, they would also tell you that it's important for their career, they love learning, someone suggested it, they were offered a scholarship, those kinds of things. So in that sense, these students are like our on-campus students. But then if we go to the next slide, reasons why they've studied by distance. Over 200, which is still less than half of our respondents, didn't live nearby. Okay, they, I guess, you know, maybe could have moved, maybe couldn't, but where they lived was a big deal. But, you know, over 120 just preferred it. They just preferred studying by distance. And in this post-COVID world, that's increasingly a choice. And many of us in academia have had that kind of privilege for a while, that we can work a bit more flexibly than some in other professions. Parenting, employment commitments that they are juggling, the preference that it was the best fit, or actually the only way that they could make a doctorate work. And then we had over 150 who had become distance students because of COVID. They hadn't chosen it. It happened to them. And then a small number who also became distance students due to other unexpected circumstances. So this is more of the picture of the complexity, really. This gives us some more insights again about where they were. Only 63 were actually enrolled in an online doctoral program. The rest had some of these other configurations going on. 121 near the bottom would have preferred to study on campus but couldn't. But the other 400 or so, studying on campus was not put down as a preference that they were prevented from doing. Next one, Jamie. We asked them about how supervision happened for them, because that's a really key piece of any doctorate. These graphs look at the percentage, whether they told us that they never or occasionally or often used these modes of engaging with their supervisors. The most common were the video conference. So you can see that over 80% were either the orange or the green, so occasionally or often used Zoom or Teams or something to meet with supervisors. And the third one down, they had email or written feedback on drafts, really, really common. A small number though, talking by phone, texting, WhatsApp. Just over half chose to go into campus at least occasionally and meet their supervisor face-to-face. And a surprising number at the bottom were required to go in and meet face-to-face. You can see a small green proportion who were required to go in a lot to meet with supervisors face-to-face, and then another group who had to do that sometimes. So we have some wonderings about that. I'm sure you will too, about whether that was attached to an event like confirmation or defence, or whether that was more about an individual supervisor's preference or level of comfort with other ways of working. And Jamie, next one. They were enthusiastic consumers of research and development activities, which makes sense really when you're not in the institutional environment, you're not having hallway conversations or in the staff room or the graduate student room. You need other ways to connect with others and grow your learning. So there was a lot of uptake from whether it was, reading about how to do research be a doctoral student, manage your time, all of these things, online materials, participating in conferences and things. And over half participated in some form of online support networks, which I certainly found life-changing when I discovered those partway through my doctorate. Next one, Jamie. Because so many of our respondents were still enrolled in 2022, they had naturally been undertaking their doctorate during COVID, unless they were, very recently enrolled. So we also asked them a few things about how that had impacted their doctorate. Next one, Jamie. We started with the impact on life to remember what might be going on for people. That biggest bar was the disruption of lockdowns, whether in their local community or nationally. But there are other things, health implications, changes to employment or income or responsibilities, fear, distress, long COVID, unable to get where they wanted to go, international students who were stuck in the country that they had been collecting data in and couldn't get back to where the university was because borders had closed, or those sorts of scenarios. And then the next one, Jamie, how did it, of the range of how it affected people, but then the next one is how did it affect their doctoral study? This was really interesting. So the red, orange and green tells us whether each of these points got worse, stayed about the same, or got better. So there were some students who told us that all of these things got better as a result of COVID. So for some students, COVID suddenly made it easier to access university staff, resources and support services, probably because universities started to offer these things online more than before. So we would see that as a positive move, right? A surprising number, the biggest green, is that third one down, the time I had available for my study and research. That was the thing that the most students said got better. It's still not a majority by any stretch. A lot of people had reduced time for their study and research, the red bar, likely because of, care and responsibilities and things. And a second to bottom one, my ability to complete my work on time really negatively impacted, as was the energy and headspace that they had for their study and research. So these are really significant things, and good to hear it just from this distance cohort. Is that the end from me, Jamie? Yes.
Thanks, Katrina. So I know we're sort of rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to do this quite quickly, but we started to look through some of the open text questions from the survey. And there was a particular question about some of the barriers that students have encountered. And looking through this, there were a number of barriers of note. Time zones for research and development sessions and gatherings, limited opportunities for synchronous induction or orientation, financial barriers, stress, mental health, which sort of support some of the things that we were seeing in the survey itself. Limited institutional policies about distance doctoral study, and sort of students who are hidden within institutions, maybe not clear about whether there are appropriate provisions put in place. Barriers around time management, limited interaction with other doctoral peers, and inability to access resources at a distance, as well as challenges communicating with supervisors. In terms of some of the strategies that students identified, being proactive around induction and orientation to learn systems and how to learn to navigate the university at a distance. So early engagement being really important. Clear divisions, marking those clear divisions between home and work time, including thoughts about spatial arrangements, whether conversations need to happen with partners and family members to try and make some of those divisions, as well as the importance of community and connection, whether those are writing groups or finding connection outside of the institution, or reaching out to research mentors. In terms of the successes, There were typical academic milestones, confirmation, submission, defense, graduation, all of those things that we like to see from doctoral students. Some successes with juggling and multitasking and balance, and that being a source of pride and strength for students. Successes with managing health and well-being, that distance doctoral study can offer those opportunities to take a walk during the day or cook healthy food, that kind of thing. And the ultimate success, I guess, of there being a bridge, a pathway of access to doctoral study, that's something that it has enabled for students. So we wanted to land on a couple of key messages before we open up to questions. Our first key message is that distance pathways for doctoral research shouldn't be positioned as second best or an anomaly. We know that it may be a choice, it may be the only way. It can be rich and enabling and successful, and it may need, or it will need, institutional planning and support to ensure that it is an equitable quality experience for all students. So that's something that we want to make sure we emphasize. And the second is to shift this discourse and practice, we need to question what distance means today in the wake of the pandemic, when so many of us are working in hybrid and mixed kinds of modes. To understand who distance doctoral researchers are and what their unique experiences of the institution might be, to enable bespoke provision for distance learners as a unique community, as well as at the same time mainstreaming their inclusion into our wider programming. And also to raise the visibility of distance cohorts and pathways with positive and diverse representations of what distance students can do, which can be amazing. So what happens next? We're hoping to use the data to inform academic publications, to create resources and tools and training and blog posts and other supports for distance doctoral researchers, and to commit to advocating for this community of researchers who we care passionately about. So please track our updates on our project using the project hashtag, or follow updates from our website, which you can see a little screen grab of above. So thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Carolina and to the questions.
Yes, thank you so much. This was amazing. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Dustin. Dustin, do you want to come on camera and ask your question? I always ask this. Or do you just want me to read it out? Either way it works. I can also just read it out. That's fine. So Dustin is asking any barriers around epistemological disagreements.
Yeah, so it was great that Dustin put that in the chat, because that gave me time to go back to the data and check while Jamie was finishing off the last couple of slides. No, there weren't, but we weren't asking them about all of the barriers related to doing a PhD. The wording of the question was, please tell us about some of the barriers you face due to undertaking some or all of your doctorate via distance. So that doesn't mean that they didn't have some epistemological barriers or conflicts with supervisors and things, but that wasn't what we really asked them to tell us about, because there's been lots of research about what's challenging about doing a doctorate. But we were interested in what makes it different. How is it different doing it if you're not on campus? So the closest thing was, the large number of students telling us that the access to their supervisors, the nature of the feedback, the time to get the feedback, whether it was clear, whether supervision was just them sitting quietly listening to the supervisor tell them, almost like lecturing them about their work, telling them all of the supervisor's thoughts, which could have been, in an email, so that they didn't have a time to do that dialogic back and forth, that sense making that we do in kind of social construction of knowledge. So those were the barriers in terms of their sense making and their learning was more about the way communication and engagement with supervisors did or didn't happen.
Thank you, Katrina. We have a comment from Karen. Part of my work includes me having non-judgmental evaluative study coaching conversations with PhD researchers. And many of these points are brought up again and again. Just the chance to offload to an independent person who listens attentively apparently helps.
Caron, I wonder if any of the students that you're working with are distance students. Have you noticed any particular challenges or any particular trends in the conversations that you've been having with those students? Feel free to jump on camera or type in the chat. It'd be interesting to hear.
I think, Robin, yeah, sorry, I'm just going to hand over to Robin, who just raised his hand.
Hello.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks very
Hi.
much. It was really interesting. So I have some experience of supervising a remote student who became remote, during COVID. But for like you said, that resonated many different things with her family and health issues. And so I thought that there was, the adoption of Zoom and things being hybrid was actually a very positive step for her. But I wondered if you could say anything, or you'd looked at the sense of community. So I think now there's a tension, as we're coming back, between people who are pushing very much, for people to come back to the office, which is understandable, with arguments around, a sense of community and rebuilding that community. But yeah, do you have any tips for how to do that in a way that maybe doesn't exclude these people who can't come back as easily?
Yeah, I think we have to define community in more than one way. I think there's overwhelming research that community and a sense of belonging is really important for doctoral students' mental health and well-being, as much as their learning and development, their scholarly identity work. Doing a PhD in isolation is the worst way to do a PhD. But community can happen in lots of places. And so I think, and based on what we're hearing in the survey, what matters is that students have community, not which community they have. So if we say that community happens in the building, we're kind of discounting some of the other ways community could happen. I think an inclusive, maybe universal design kind of approach would be to talk with students about the importance of community and why it's needed, how it helps them learn, grow, remember their progress, because they'll meet somebody who's a few steps behind them, which can be very reassuring if you still feel like you're the baby and the novice and the imposter. But to explore different places that can happen. Some students won't want to come into campus for things or Zoom into university things, or the time zones might not work, but they can look at community through, online researcher networks, professional associations, finding a writing buddy, online writing retreats, in-person writing retreats, Twitter. There's pros and cons. If you don't have a strong sense of connection to your institutional community, but you build an outward community, you're actually building the kind of network capital that academics rely on for career progression and long-term research collaborations and things. So we don't have to frame one form of community as better. So for me, the bottom line is that community matters. And lots of our respondents are telling us stories of either the isolation being the biggest challenge, or finding community in whatever form that was being such a lifesaver. And literally one person said that finding some guidance and resources online literally stopped a suicide completion. That's where they were at. And then finding this, I'm not the only person, there are people out there going through this, and there are things that can help us, made such a difference. Jamie, that's a long ramble from me, but it's a topic that I hear about a lot.
Yeah, I think that, and that's one of the things which Chin in particular has been really valuable in our study. She's, she researches sort of digital community, academic digital community, and I think it's important for us to think about those affordances, whether we're upskilling our doctoral students and being able to navigate and participate in those kinds of digital communities, as well as what kinds of accommodations can we make when we're working in the flesh space of a department meeting. I know for me as a supervisor, co-coordinate a doctoral group for my students and another colleague student. So we bring all of our students together, and you know, it's just about doing a little bit of work beforehand, thinking, you know, who do we need to accommodate in particular kinds of ways to ensure that they're able to participate, so we can still have the gathering in face-to-face, but also enable their participation at a distance too.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Robin. I have a question from Katie, who's interested in your views on the additional challenges of students working full-time whilst doing a PhD part-time. She didn't want people to feel she wasn't 100% dedicated to her PhD, but work commitments had to come first, as this what pays the bills.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that we see not only with people who manage sort of working responsibilities, but also care responsibilities. There's often a tendency, we know across the sort of doctoral education literature, for people to minimize or hide some of those responsibilities in order to achieve recognition as a serious researcher. And so I think that, this is a challenge that lots of students navigate, how to put multiple parts of a life together can be really challenging. But we also know that, you know, from the research, from our survey, that students are incredibly resilient. Lots of students make it work, make it happen. Lots of students find satisfaction and pleasure in being able to manage it, you know, and being able to have all of what's going on in their life as well as a doctorate too. So that's a story that's definitely emerging from our data, I'd say.
Thank you. We have another question from Dustin. What can or should doctoral staff do to foster community? I think it works well with what Robin said.
Yeah, totally.
Before, but what are concrete steps maybe? Yeah.
So I think it's, you know, we have this body of scholarship on doctoral education and what supports doctoral student success, learning, completion, mental health and well-being. But our students are not going to know about what that literature says. And so I think we have a brokering job. We need to work with our students about their project and their research. But I think we also need to have some of those wider conversations and build that in. You know, if we're doing regular progress reviews, that can be a helpful trigger time to do a check-in about some of the bigger things. We really like Trish Jackman's work on first-year doctoral students and the factors that support their mental health and well-being. So we have created a couple of tools that students can use or supervisors can use with students. They're free on our website to kind of reflect on how am I going in these different dimensions? What resources or connections do I have in place? Why are these things important? Because you've got to build the community before you hit the crisis, right? So that it's there when you need it. So I think for supervisors, getting ahead and teaching our students, talking with our students about the fact that community is important, because it's kind of an occupational hazard of doing a PhD, right? That you work individually. It's a one-person project, which is not how the rest of academia kind of works. And you're the student working with these super smart supervisory adults. You're not. We have to help people break out of that mode of being at the bottom of the knowledge triangle all the time.
I asked that question because I do a doctorate part-time and I work full-time at Glasgow University. There's no community on our program, and I partially lay the blame, if I can call it blame, on the program itself. We have a WhatsApp chat, but given the cohort, they tend to use it as a moan fest rather than helping each other. It's typical kind of Anglophone nature of, oh, we can't help each other, it's plagiarism. It's not, they haven't said that explicitly, but I get it. And given my role of working at the university as well, initially on the program, some were a little bit suspect of me and my role. Oh, a staff member, spy. It's like, oh, you know what? I don't have time to deal with this. Lots of school teachers on the program, to be fair. So maybe in school, the hierarchy of power is much stronger and they feel less inclined to actually say anything or, you know, stick out, so to speak. But that's why I asked that question, because I think community is important. I've taught before on pre-masters, and it certainly was important there, and pre-sessionals as well. But
yeah, and we think that, you know, doctoral students by definition are doing something new and entering a new space, and so they deserve some signposting and guidance as they come into that space. You know, we don't have to be their buddies, but I think it pays off, you know, even if you want to take the really utilitarian argument of why should I as a supervisor bother with that, that's their problem. Well, it's going to end better for the student and therefore for you if they complete in a timelier fashion, if they're coping better, if they've got more people to go to with questions. So I think that that's our equity argument, really, that we have a kind of a moral role as the institutions and the supervisors to shape this culture, because students don't know what they don't know. They could lose years before they accidentally stumble across the fact, you know, there's a 13,000 member Women in Academia network on Facebook. Nobody tells you this stuff. So I think we could be better at being proactive. So I tend to agree with you. Without knowing the ins and outs of your institution, you know, we would certainly say that we'd love to see all institutions and all supervisors being a bit more proactive in some of these conversations to set students up for success rather than leave them to it and hope they stumble across stuff they didn't know they needed to look for.
Yeah. Thank you. There's one more question by Derek. I'm conscious of the time, but I still want to ask this one. Does the age data break down differently across different subject areas in your research?
I haven't checked that yet. As Jamie said, we're early in the analysis, and because, you know, we're not going to be making great claims about, you know, we're not going to be doing statistical testing on the differences of groups and things, because it's not that kind of a survey. It's an exploratory, let's hear diverse stories to give us a foundation for going further. Yeah, we can certainly look at that. It will be interesting to see, but we haven't done that yet, and that's partly why.
Thank you. And I think I'm just going to ask a concluding question before we wrap up, is on your second to last slide, you talked about different key messages. When I read through them and when you described them, they were basically the more abstract values. So which, let's say, top 3 concrete steps would you extract from those values to support doctoral students in general?
Should we do 3 each? Should we see how we go?
Go for it.
3 concrete things. So I'm assuming that I'm speaking to, you know, supervisors and institution-y kind of categories.
Yes.
Become conscious of distant students as a cohort. So remembering that they might be there, thinking about who they might be, and kind of tuning in, you know, the radar being on is a huge part of our work, is just kind of getting this into people's minds, so that when we look again at our program brochure or something, we stop and think and go, does it mention different pathways? Does it implicitly convey a message that all students fit this box? So the radar on would be step 1. Step 2 would be build in ways to listen to students often, and make sure you're hearing from the students who are not on campus all the time. You know, certainly at my institution, the Postgrad Students Association is made up of the people who are on campus every day, who tend to be international students whose visas mean that they have to be on campus every day because they can't work and they have to be studying face-to-face as part of their visa requirements. So they are not a representative body of the wider doctoral student cohort. So for finding ways to listen well, whether that's surveys, through supervisors, whatever, and upskilling, you know, spreading the word with supervisors, institution, front desk staff, you know, student inquiries staff, that yes, of course, students can work in all of these different ways. Yes, of course you can do it part-time. Yes, of course you can do it online, and that we don't sort of make that feel like an anomaly. I don't know if that's concrete enough, but those are things that would make a difference. What about you, Jamie?
Maybe I'll sort of pinpoint mine to students. So for me, I think some of the things that we can see that students can do, distance doctoral students can do, are around, searching for community, finding community that is already out there, kind of similar to Katrina's point, the radar, putting your sort of ears out just to see who's out there, what's out there, but also creating community where you don't find it, where you don't see it. We know that doctoral students are incredibly, capable and talented, know what they want, know what they need. And so the invitation is there for students to take that initiative and build what they need if they don't find it in front of them. And I think another piece of advice to sort of extract out is to be real about the kind of life you already have, the life you live, to when you're planning and when you're thinking about doctoral study and doing it by distance, what's the life you have? Don't pretend that life isn't going to continue on. Like, plan for the life that you already live, make space for that. Acknowledge that it's important, that your relationships, your health, your well-being, your commitments, are there and necessary, and then how to make the PhD fit in and around that. So yeah, I guess those would be some places to end on.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Katrina and James for coming here, for the talk, for sharing their research project and findings, and all the insights, personal and based on the data that you have collected. Thank you very much. And we're again going to have the recording of this on our TILE website, and we're looking forward to see you on next time. Thank you very much.
Fab, thank you.
Thank you.